I'm glad to see that New Jersey has come to Iowa. How great is that? Great to have you here. And I think you understand I'll deal with you the same way here as I deal with you in New Jersey.
Back now on America's Forum, of course, New Jersey Governor Chris Christie responding to hecklers that interrupted his interview during Iowa's Ag Summit over the weekend. Of course, we know those town halls, and in fact, politically, it first put Chris Christie on the map as governor of New Jersey, dealing with those who had a bit of difference with him politically, but has that act kind of worn thin? Let's bring in our panel. Steve Deace is the author of the book Rules for Patriots, How Conservatives Can Win Again. He joins us from Des Moines, Iowa. And on the left from Washington, D.C., Ari Rabin-Havt, host of The Agenda on Sirius XM Radio. He is also a former aide to Senator Harry Reid. So, Steve, you are out there in Iowa. A kinder, gentler Chris Christie?
I think Chris Christie is dead man walking, JD. Chris Christie's the guy at the poker table who tried to buy the pot early, and then once we drew a couple more cards, realized he had a weak hand. And everyone knows he's going to fold, including him. But you play it out for a little bit. You don't want to fold right away because then you look like a bit of a clown, right? So you make it look like, oh, man, I'm really torn. I'm not sure what to do. We all know whether it's in 2 minutes or 20 minutes, you are going to fold. You just need to save face. And that's what Chris Christie 2016 is, JD.
What about that, Ari, from your perspective on the left?
Well, JD, you know I like to gamble, so a poker analogy is gonna strike me right. I think my compatriot on the right is absolutely right. I think the act won't work anymore. I think he's a dead man walking, and I think it's just a matter of time before he gives it all up.
Well, let's turn to another candidate who says he's going to take it all on, Steve, and that is Jeb Bush, who was back out talking amnesty and talking about new Americans. Does he have a foothold among establishment Iowa conservatives?
I will tell you he does, but not as strong as I would have told you about a month ago. What I am hearing is there's a lot of concern. This is Romney Redux, but worse. And you mentioned the amnesty issue, the Common Core issue. Those are issues that are sun hot to the base right now. And to Jeb's credit, he's not going to pander. He's not going to pull a Romney. We're not going to have, cathartic moments on the road to Des Moines that typically only happen on the road to Damascus. But he's going to be honest and straight up. I give him credit for that. Rudy Giuliani did that as well, which is why, despite the fact he's a pretty liberal Republican, he is still held in high regard by conservatives because he was honest with us. But when push came to shove and you asked us to vote whether we wanted Rudy president, we told you we liked him, but no, we did not want him as a standard bearer. And I think when you see what Scott Walker did at the Ag Summit, he flip-flopped his previous position on ethanol, which is powerful, but still not nearly as powerful as it was, say, 5 or 10 years ago in Iowa politics. But I think Scott Walker has let it be known that he's going to go after some of Jeb's establishment support, making the case that Jeb is too damaged. And I will tell you, I've heard from some national people, even though on the ground I think conservatives still have a lot of making up to do with Marco Rubio over the Gang of Eight. I've heard from a lot of national people that there is interest in Marco Rubio as also an alternative to Jeb Bush, who more and more people outside of Bush loyalists, JD, see as damaged goods.
Well, very quickly to Stephen, I want to get Ari in on this, but the whole reversal, it seems like Walker has done a 180 on amnesty, and we heard Rubio has done the same. Does that hold water with Iowa conservatives?
Well, it goes back to what I just said a few minutes ago. You trust these conversions when they happen on the road to Damascus, not the road to Des Moines. And I think what Scott Walker's going to have to show is like what Bobby Jindal did on Common Core when he changed his mind. And now he's become a vehement opponent. He knows the issue. He challenges it head on. And I think if conservatives, if Scott Walker wants us to believe his conversion is real, he'll have to do the same where it comes to amnesty.
Minute left. Ari, let me get you in on this thing. Scott Walker, is he the guy the left is most concerned about?
Well, he's the guy I'm most concerned about, though his flip-flop on immigration is really interesting because you'd think he could be a guy who's stuck to his guns. He said he's the guy who's strong enough to stand up to unions, but he's clearly not strong enough to stand up for his own values because even his own explanation, frankly, for his flip-flop was fairly weak.
So when you hear that, Steve, when you hear that from Ari, You're likewise skeptical of this conversion on immigration. 20 seconds, Steve.
I think Ari, unfortunately, nailed it. I think if you're going to run as the guy that takes on all comers and is beat down as challengers, you probably don't want to go around evolving 1 month into your campaign on some key issues.
Especially not given the red-hot nature of the whole notion of evolution. Pardon the observation there, Steve. And Ari, hang in there. There is more straight ahead as America's Forum continues with the panel.
It's the idea held by generations of citizens who believe that America is a constant work in progress, who believe that loving this country requires more than singing its praises or avoiding uncomfortable truths. It requires the occasional disruption, the willingness to speak out for what is right, to shake up the status quo. That's America.
President Obama commemorating the 50th anniversary of the Civil Rights era Selma March. This is a new CNN poll finds 4 out of 10 Americans believe race relations in the United States have actually gotten worse during President Obama's time in office. And we should also note that during that commemoration, groups of so-called immigrants' rights activists descended on Selma, trying to say that, well, the rights of illegals are tantamount to civil rights. That becomes fodder for our discussion with the political panel as we bring them back. Ari Rabin-Havt, host of The Agenda on Sirius XM Radio, and Steve Deace, author of the book Rules for Patriots, How Conservatives Can Win Again. Ari, to you. Do you think it's appropriate for the so-called immigrants' rights group to show up at the Civil Rights March?
I think it's appropriate for anybody who wants to seek rights in the United States to speak out at any time they please, as long as they're operating within the rules of debate. I think it's totally appropriate. I think if they want to speak out, that is their fundamental right to do so.
Are immigrant rights tantamount to civil rights in your mind, Ari?
Yes. I think rights for all people to live in this country are civil rights issues.
Let's turn to Steve Deace. Steve, do you agree?
I'm not really sure how you have a right to live wherever you want and have private property rights at the exact same time. It would seem to me you have either one or the other, JD, and once you assert that someone does have any private property rights at all, then the so-called right to live wherever you want, which is what it seemed as like Ari was articulating, goes out the window. And then it becomes a debate about just how far do private property rights extend. And I attack your question this way to point out that I know what you're getting at. The entire premise of your question is flawed. I mean, you don't have a right to something that doesn't belong to you. And our Constitution is here to protect the rights of Americans. It does not protect the rights of people outside the United States of America.
It is worth noting that there was a historic struggle a half-century ago. The president, as is his wont, as our commander-in-chief, as our nation's leader, ceremonial significance being there in Selma. But Ari, how do you account for the polling that shows so many Americans actually rating race relations worse now under our first black president?
Because 4 in 10 Americans will say that anything under Barack Obama's presidency is worse. I mean, that was the number you gave, right? 4 in 10. 4 in 10 Americans will say the sky is less blue under Barack Obama, the trees are less green under Barack Obama. 4 in 10 Americans will say chocolate tastes worse under Barack Obama. You know, and
usually doesn't it come down to bases kind of being around 30%? But I take your point that there are some who are negative about the president. Steve Deace, does it go beyond that, though?
Well, I think for what Ari is asserting to be true, JD, so must the opposite then. So then we must have 4 in 10 Americans that say no matter what happens to their health care, Obama is a messianic figure. No matter what the unemployment rate actually is, accurately, Obama is a messianic figure. No matter what our standing in the world must be, Obama is a messianic figure. One cannot be true without the other. And so if both of those polarities are true, I think what it speaks is to a much deeper issue than racism, frankly. I think it speaks to the division, and I think racism is born out of that, or what people think about race relations, JD, is born out of that. The country is as polarized right now as it has been at any point in my lifetime. And this is, keep in mind, with the Republican Party offering really no opposition on a national level to Barack Obama at all. It's just all idle words. They fund every last scheme of his that voters just rejected in the last election. So without any tangible, real opposition on a national level, we are still this divisive. And I think it begs a question: what is it about this president's policies and the results therein that create this level of division and suspicion? Clearly, he did not turn out to be the healer we were promised in 2008.
And unfortunately, it's a question we don't have time for Ari to answer. Gentlemen, we'll have you both back in the not-too-distant future. To you both, our thanks, and America's Forum is coming right back.